order the April 20th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. First item on our agenda is roll call.
Commissioner Height.
Present.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Present.
Commissioner Poland, sorry, my list is wrong.
Here.
Poland. Commissioner Schernig.
Here.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Here.
Commissioner Flake. Here. Commissioner Bruno.
Here.
Okay. Next on our agenda is communications from Planning and Development Services Director Joni Marsh.
Chairman Schernig and Commissioners, I just want to welcome to the Commission our new member and alternate, Aaron Rodriguez. So welcome to Aaron. I'm sure he'll be happy to stick around and get to know you for 5 or 10 minutes afterwards. But thank you for signing up and joining us. We like to think we're a congenial and fun group. At least that's how I categorize it. So Josh might give you a different categorization. But yeah. So that's all I had for now.
Great. Thank you. This is a public meeting. Although there are no public hearing items on the agenda, we still have a public invited to be heard section. Nobody has signed up. I see nobody in the audience, and nobody's hiding. So we will close the public invited to be heard section. Next is approval of the minutes from March 16, 2016. Any discussion about the minutes? Seeing none, any motion to approve?
Move to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay. Any seconds?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Poland. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. We move on to other business, which is Envision Longmont, a review of the draft plan with Aaron and Phil. Take it away.
Good evening, Chairman Schernig, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm Erin Fosdick with the Planning and Development Services Department, and I'm joined by Phil Greenwald, Transportation Planner. This will be the last time we come to you in a study session with Envision Longmont. The next time we bring this plan back to you, provided you don't direct us to do something different, will be at your May meeting, where we will get a recommendation from you prior to taking this plan to council. So we're very excited that we finally have the full draft to share with you. This is a culmination of over a year of work, and you've put a lot of time and effort into that, and Phil and I truly appreciate that. So what we wanted to do tonight is really kind of walk through the sections of the plan, get any feedback from you, kind of cover the sections that we haven't spent time on, and then obviously just answer any outstanding questions you have. We want to make sure that at the end of tonight you feel comfortable with us bringing this back to you for your recommendation. Again, we are going to be looking for a 7-4 vote recommendation. So if there's anything that you would like us to incorporate into the adoption draft, any outstanding questions or concerns that you have tonight would be the time to bring those up. So we did send out a full copy of the plan with your packet. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. I think we also provided a copy of the plan summary at your stations tonight. And that just really does provide a summary of the plan. You can think of this as the executive summary. While we hope everyone in the community will read the full plan, we anticipate that many people will be satisfied reading this plan summary. So we're happy to take comments on that as well. The plan is organized really into 4 sections and then a kind of a technical supplement, which Phil will talk about here in a second. The plan framework is really the introductory section. So this is really the section that talks about how to use the plan, what's in the plan, and kind of generally summarizes the other sections of the plan. We're not going to spend time on that tonight. I'm happy to take any comments. I should also note that if you have comments, I know Chairman Schernig mentioned prior to the meeting that he had some kind of grammatical corrections or typos. We're happy to take those offline either after this meeting or via email or whatever other form works for you. The second section is the policy framework. This is the section that we've spent time as a group reviewing. The Commission has seen this section several times. We're not anticipating talking through this tonight. Certainly if you have things you want to talk about, we can, but Phil and I won't be going into much detail on this. This really provides the foundation, the policy framework, provides those vision and guiding principles, the goals, and obviously the policies. We have added indicators, so this is something new, and we can spend just a moment talking about this. But that's something that you haven't seen to date. The growth framework is a piece that you've seen snippets of, but here it's kind of collected all into one place. This is probably one of the sections that, as the Planning Commission, you will use most frequently. The future land use plan, the future land use map, in addition to the land use categories, are contained in this section. We also have the multimodal transportation plan, which Phil will talk a little bit more about. And then we've also added the focus areas. So I think early on we talked a little bit about the focus areas, but now you're really seeing those developed out. So that's a new section that we can spend a little time on. Finally, the fourth section is the implementation strategies. Again, this is really where the rubber meets the road and how we kind of get things done in the plan. So these are the recommended actions that will help us support the implementation of the plan. These are summarized by guiding principles, and we'll go through those briefly. Finally, again, Phil will talk more about this, but we're calling it an appendix now. We're not exactly sure what form that will take in the adoption draft, but we have a multimodal transportation implementation plan, or MTIP, for those of you who like acronyms like Phil and I. This is really where we've put a lot of the technical analysis, the forecasting, some more of the maps and the detail that folks like Phil really love to look at, but folks like me may or may not want to spend too much time with. And so Phil will go through that a little bit. So again, I mentioned we're not going to spend a ton of time on the policy framework, but just to remind everyone and to introduce to Commissioner Rodriguez, since this is your first time, the plan is really organized around 6 guiding principles that form our vision. Those are here. At the core of the plan is really how do we make Longmont more sustainable and more resilient. So that's a theme that you see carried throughout the goals and also the policies. And this, as this graphic illustrates, the 6 guiding principles are really working in tandem. So this is a systems approach to a comprehensive plan rather than kind of a topic-by-topic approach. So there's a lot of crossover. It's a little bit different than the way we've done it in the past. No one guiding principle is more important or weighted more heavily in terms of the plan. Certainly, elected and appointed officials can weight things more heavily based on what the application is in front of them. But really, these are all important components of our vision. For each of the principles, we talk about the trends and the key issues. We talk about the vision and our desired outcomes. And then the policies really help us figure out how these will be carried out as part of our day-to-day decision making. As I mentioned, we've added indicators. That's something new that you're seeing for the first time. This is similar to the Longmont Area Comprehensive Plan indicators that we have in the plan now, so those may look somewhat familiar to you. These are really going to be how we track our progress over time. And so we anticipate using these in creating an annual or biannual kind of report card that we can report to you, to council, and the community on how we're doing. We're also anticipating collecting some other supporting data. This is important in kind of helping us tell the story. So for example, we have several indicators that'll help tell us how we're doing in terms of meeting our goals around, let's say, livable centers, corridors, and neighborhoods. The supporting data will help kind of fill in some gaps and may help us tell a more complete story, but we're not necessarily going to have targets associated with those. So we will be collecting and reporting on a lot of data. And I should have mentioned, if you have comments and you want to stop me, please do so. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of keep going through and we can get comments at the end. So whatever works best for you all. So the growth framework, again, really has 3 components. We'll start with the future land use plan. And again, this section really talks about the kind of physical growth. How are we going to grow and develop over the next 10 to 20 years? As you know, as a commission, this is not new to you. There's several factors that are influencing our growth, and the plan talks a little bit about these. We have residential areas, we have employment areas, existing and planned. And we know that most of our growth is going to be focused on already developed portions of Longmont. We do have some greenfield or undeveloped areas that will develop in the next 10 to 20 years, but we also know that we're surrounded on 3 sides by a lot of a lot of open space and conservation easements. And then we also have several communities to our east that have annexed land, so we're somewhat constrained in terms of our outward growth. And so this plan is really focused more on that inward growth and looking towards infill and redevelopment, particularly in our centers and corridors. Some other factors that are influencing growth, again, the concept of centers and corridors comes up here. We've really seen this as an opportunity in this plan to create great places. That's what we've heard a lot through our outreach, is that people want more concentrated growth. They understand that growth's going to happen. They want to make sure that we're protecting kind of those established, stable neighborhoods, but there are some places that folks feel like we could have some more intensification and that redevelopment might be appropriate. And so I think this concept of centers and corridors really comes up here. We also know, based a lot on the floods that happened in 2013, that we need to be thinking about our physical development as it relates to resiliency. And so we've really tried to look at flood zones and other kind of environmental constraints that impact our growth patterns. Some of the growth framework objectives we have are really consistent with what we've been hearing from the public, and I think these are not going to be new to you. The plan provides some dialogue about why these are important and really how the plan addresses these. So again, we've talked about promoting infill and redevelopment, creating great places for people, expanding our housing options, diversifying our housing options, and also employment. So thinking about how can we have a lot of different types of employment for everyone in Longmont, promoting healthy, active lifestyles and a healthy environment. And also expanding multimodal transportation options. And I think as we think about these, a lot of them go hand in hand. There's a lot of crossover here. Some of these framework objectives have really led us to think about areas of change and stability. This is a concept we've talked about with this group early on. This is really a way we can communicate to folks those areas that we think are going to change and are going to accept a lot of that future growth. Just to remind you, we are anticipating adding about 24,000 people to Longmont over the next 20 years, and so those people need to go somewhere. We're expecting a lot of that growth will go into these areas of change, and those are the red areas up here on your screen. We know that there are a lot of areas in Longmont that aren't going to change as much, and those are these yellow areas, the more stable areas. And so as we think about some of our indicators, some of our policies, we've been able to shape those based on these areas of change and areas of stability. So this is something that we'll be tracking over time and probably something that we'll be bringing to you in terms of applications that you see. And it'll be a little bit of a different way of thinking for us. This kind of all culminates in our future land use plan. This map is, again, something that this group uses quite frequently. It looks somewhat familiar if you are used to looking at our current map, but obviously there are some changes. We have land use categories that are based on neighborhoods, so there's 4 categories that are really dealing with more residential uses. We have several categories under kind of that mixed use category. Those are going to be the areas that are commercial, providing employment, but also allowing for some higher density housing. So this is a little bit different than our current plan. And then we also have employment land uses. If you'll recall, in our current land use map, we have industrial economic development as our employment land use. We've broken that out. We've talked about that with this group. So we have mixed use employment and primary employment. We also have parks, greenways, and open space and public, quasi-public lands, as well as some other land use categories, primarily the Terry Lake mixed use area, which is related to that State Highway 66 plan, and then obviously open space outside the planning area. We also are showing our transportation network, which Phil will talk about here in just a second. So again, reinforcing this notion that land use and transportation are really connected. We've integrated them in this plan. That's been very intentional from the beginning, and this map is another opportunity to do just that. I'm sure you'll probably have some comments on this map, and we can talk more about that as we go forward. We've taken these categories and provided a summary table where we really specify by category what the primary and secondary uses are, what the range of density, scale, height might be for each of these. This is an excerpt of some of the neighborhood categories, and then really provided some key characteristics. So talking about the type of transportation system we might expect to find, talking about maybe some more detail around some of the uses you could see, general characteristics. And then one thing that I think is particularly important is talking about some of the transitions. So as a zone abuts another zone, a land use area, what might we expect to see? And this will be helpful for us as we start looking at our land development code updates and potentially updating some of our zoning categories. This will be something that can help inform that. We've also included in the plan some additional detail and some graphical representations. This is something I don't think that the Commission has seen before, but for most of the neighborhood and the mixed use and the employment land uses, we've provided a spread that kind of talks about the characteristics and tries to show them graphically in a little bit of a kind of a model or a SketchUp rendering type thing. So again, we're thinking this may be particularly useful as we look at some of our code updates and trying to articulate what do we really mean by a regional center or mixed neighborhood, and what might that look like in terms of its built form. So be interested if you have any feedback on this aspect. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to Phil to talk a little bit about the multimodal transportation plan section.
Thanks, Aaron. I think you did touch on it, though, Aaron, about the kind of uniqueness of this plan where we really do integrate the land uses and the transportation. And that's something that a lot of folks aren't doing right now. So we are, I don't want to say cutting edge, but we're kind of ahead of the game on some of that. It is kind of new for us. As you look at the current comprehensive plan that we've been working with, and then now this newer one, you'll see a lot more of that integration piece of that. And so we're pretty excited about how this kind of moves forward. In the plan, we have basically two different pieces to it. So we do have the Envision Longmont piece that really shows the transportation sections incorporated in it. And as Aaron mentioned, we have a greater detail basically in our MTIP, or multimodal transportation implementation plan. All these maps can be found in both, so we'll go over just kind of how we put them together. We do try to stick with this presentation anyway, where we're talking about the roadway pieces of what's coming up in the future. So on this map, you'll see that we do break it down into short range, medium or mid range, and long range planning elements, or different roadways and how they come online as far as funding capabilities for the city. So these are going to be estimates. These are our best idea right now today of how these projects are going to move forward. And so you'll see on there some roads that we really know that are coming along, like State Highway 66 on the north and the orange, Nelson Road on the west side of town. Those kind of things we do know are coming in the next 10 years. And then when you start going into the green categories, State Highway 66, basically east of Main Street, all the way to County Line, that's more of a 10 to 20 year plan, kind of roadway improvement, as well as 17th there in green, Pike Road between Hover and Main Street, and Clover Basin. So those are some of the things that we know we'll have funding for in the 10 to 20 year time frame. The categories in blue are going to be more of the long range. We don't have any funding for them yet in any kind of planning scenarios, but those would be the next priorities on the list once the others are done. Also, you'll see coordinated studies, areas where we really need to do more study with CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation, before we move on any of those. And then also you'll see a coordinated study on Hover Street. So that's another one where we've seen in our modeling that there is congestion on that roadway, but it will need to be we'll need to take further study before we start talking about what kind of improvements need to happen on that roadway. So that's the roadway section. We also include the BRT, the bus rapid transit pieces on State Highway 119 and US 287. So you'll see those pieces as well. Those are roadway components, but they also obviously affect transit as well. So those are some things that we'll work on in the roadway plan and the transit plan. We'll see if it moves on to hopefully bicycle. Good. So we just took a look at the projects that we think are coming up for roadway. This one's a little busier and does need to be more of an 11 by 17, I think, piece of paper that you see in front of you instead of maybe something of this detail. Also electronically, you'll be able to zoom in on it. But basically, this shows our existing system, and the dashed lines would be something where we have projects. So again, we're building a project list, same way as we did from the roadway plan. We're building a project list from these bicycle projects, and you'll see that we kind of break those down into different categories as well, as far as whether they're on-street or off-street bicycle system, more of the trail type facility, greenway trails that you see, existing bike lanes. I think that's pretty self-explanatory where we striped out bike lanes. We also have this future enhanced multi-use corridor. We're still trying to kind of get an idea of what that really means, but right now it's really talking about how we create a trail-like experience within the right-of-way, and that can be like separated bike lanes and bike boulevards and some other ideas that are out there. And so we outline those in the plan a little more detailed. We've also come up with a new category called side path. So we talk about those paths that are not necessarily sidewalks, but they're 8 to 10 foot pathways that are adjacent or parallel to streets. Shared lanes and existing shoulders, I think those are pretty self-explanatory too. But anyway, the dashed lines are the key on that, so that builds a project list for our bicycle category. Then when we move on to transit, you'll see some short, midterm, and some long-term planning elements with the transit as well, so these improvements. Once again, everything that you see on this map besides the orange are things that we plan to do in the future. So they're future transit improvements, and again, it goes into a list of things that we want to prioritize based on the implementation piece of this. So it really does go to setting up a project list again on top of the system that we know that already exists. So you'll see on there, you'll see our idea that we have the Northwest Rail corridor that comes in along the diagonal in green there. It's listed as fast tracks. We also have the bus rapid transit corridors in blue. We also include some hopeful expansion out to Weld County someday. We really want to get that growth that's happening out in Southwest Weld tied in to the RTD system somehow. So we're talking about making connections to the east. And then you'll see some blue areas where we talk about future transit expansion within the city. And this kind of goes into, so we've separated everything by mode, so then we put it all together and have this, what we call our multimodal transportation improvement plan. So this is our master planning list. So this is where we really go back to when we're looking at the entire system and making sure we've got, our key corridors covered with the necessary roadway improvements, the necessary bicycle connections, and the new transit pieces on that as well. There's also a pedestrian component that's part of this as well. So that kind of takes us through the multimodal transportation plan. Again, there's a very much more detailed section where we really outline each of the projects in a table format, and we really try to prioritize them based on need and other criteria. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Aaron.
The final section of the growth framework is dealing with the 4 focus areas. And again, you'll recall that we've talked about these in the past. We have 4 focus areas: Hover Street Corridor, which Phil mentioned, the St. Vrain Creek Corridor, which we've talked about. We've talked about it with the St. Vrain Blueprint Plan as well as with this plan. Sugar Mill and Highway 119 Gateway. Previously, those were 2 separate focus areas. We've combined them in this final plan. And that really does have a lot of planning with the Southeast Urban Renewal area as well. So we've heard a lot about that area with the community. Another area that we heard a lot about in our outreach in terms of opportunity and kind of desire for change was the Midtown and North Main area. So I know we've talked about that with this group, and that was one focus area that really rose to the top. So what we've done for each of the focus areas is really call out and provide some additional detail. These are really areas where we think there's some real opportunity to help us with achieving some of our, kind of accepting some of that future growth. These are areas that they may have some vacant or underutilized parcels. They may be kind of ripe for redevelopment. There's a number of things going on. They typically have some really good opportunities for multimodal access, and so there's a lot going on in these areas. And so what we've tried to do is really kind of provide a little bit of an overview, talk about some of the related plans and studies that are going on. So for example, the Sugar Mill, Highway 119 Gateway, we talk about the Southeast Urban Renewal area and some of the planning that's gone on there. And then we really talk about the future land use and multimodal transportation plans, more specifically for these areas, and kind of call out some of the opportunities. So we've tried to highlight the current conditions and some of the factors that are influencing these areas, as well as provide a more detailed snapshot. really what this is setting us up for is some more detailed planning in the future. So, for example, along Main Street, we've already secured a grant to do a corridor study beginning later this year, really next year. We would anticipate doing some additional planning and studies with the Southeast Urban Renewal area. So this is really kind of forming the basis for those more detailed efforts, but it does provide some additional information above and beyond kind of what the general future land use map shows. And then the final section of the plan is really the implementation section. So this is something that we've heard all along is extremely important. I think it was something people wanted to see from the very beginning. We want to see the detail. We want to see how you're going to get it done, and now we have that. So really, these are organized by the guiding principles. So the example here is for the first guiding principle, supporting livable centers, corridors, and neighborhoods. We talk about how these strategies are going to support the vision, and then we really detail out each strategy. They're broken up into 3 sections. Those would be near-term actions, so kind of starting from when the plan is adopted through about 5 years. Longer-term strategies, which we think we'll be working on probably 5 years and beyond. And then ongoing strategies, which are things that will kind of continually be happening. We've also tried to identify which department is going to take the lead on these. Obviously, there's some that multiple departments will be involved in, and so we've listed that out. We also know that various advisory boards, other community groups, and organizations may also be involved. We haven't gone into a lot of detail, but in some cases we have put that, particularly if another organization, for example, the Longmont Economic Development Partnership, may be taking the lead on some things, and so we've tried to note that. And then finally, we've tried to categorize these by the type of strategy they are. So is it really a policy or program? Is it a regulatory revision, for example, a code update? Is it a public improvement? Is it some type of infrastructure improvement? Is it a partnership, or is it some type of advocacy role that we might be playing? So the other thing that we've tried to do is directly tie this back to the goals. So you'll see under the strategy which goals that it supports. I think what you can also see here is some strategies really reach across and support many goals. Some goals are supported by many strategies. We've just tried to provide that tie. It doesn't necessarily mean that one strategy is more important than the other, but that was information that folks had asked for. So just to kind of summarize before we take questions and comments, the plan is available online for review until actually tomorrow, the 21st. So if you have comments that you want to share online, get them in before midnight tomorrow. We'll take any comments that we receive from this group, and we'll incorporate those into our staff feedback that we get to our consultant team. They'll be busy making revisions over the next week or so, and then we will have an adoption draft that's released. Right now that date is set for May 4th. May the 4th be with you. We will then be preparing to go to the Transportation Advisory Board on May 9th. We're seeking a recommendation from the Transportation Advisory Board. We'll be back to this group on May 25th to get a recommendation from you. And then we'll be starting our hearings with the City Council on June 14th. That will be the first reading, and then second reading will be on June 28th. So we'll have a public hearing and second reading on June 28th. In the interim, we also may be visiting with some of the other advisory boards. I think we're going to Parks and Rec Advisory Board as well. But these are the TAB, and then City Council are really the folks that have been most involved. And so we're seeking formal recommendations from Planning Commission and TAB. So with that, I don't know if Phil has anything else to add, but obviously we'd love to hear from you, get your feedback, answer any questions that you might have, and make sure that we're all ready for May 25th.
Okay, Commissioner Flagg.
I had a question regarding the St. Vrain Creek corridor, number 2 there. You listed future land use and multimodal plan. And under number 3, you talk about having high-density residential uses and support services are encouraged in both locations. And maybe I'm just being dense this evening, but what do you mean both locations?
Commissioner Flagg, so I think you're referring to page 151, 150 and 151. You know, that's a really good question. I'm not sure what both locations refers to. I think what this is really referring to is there's areas on kind of the, I'll say northwest and southeast side of Ken Pratt Boulevard. And really there's opportunities to potentially integrate higher density residential and support services in both of those areas. We'll clarify that in the adoption draft because, you know, clearly I'm not able to, I think that's what that's referring to, but we'll clarify that.
Commissioner Bruno, can you hit your mic, Aaron?
I just have a couple of questions. Phil, do you know when that RTD hub, when that's sort of planned to happen, or is that just way out there somewhere?
Commissioner Bruno, actually we're working on, with a consulting firm currently, to look at different properties out there to start the property purchasing piece of that. I don't know if this board or this commission is aware that the city has basically kind of pulled the control away from RTD on that a little bit. With RTD's blessing, I might add, they want us to certainly build this the way we want to see fit, and we have worked with City Council to do that. It's going to cost us a little bit more, probably, but we are looking at what properties need to be acquired in that. But your question is when, and so we're hoping by 2020 that we can have something actually working and built. We're hoping before then, but I'm going to say 2020 for now.
Commissioner Bruno, follow-up?
I'm sorry.
Do you have a follow-up?
Well, I just have a couple more questions,
Okay.
so I don't know if I should just keep rolling.
Let's stick with you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're having a little microphone tag
Okay.
going on here, so we'll try to work it out.
I had a question about something you just covered, Aaron, just a couple of minutes ago, and that was the part about sort of streamlining the process so that administrative decisions can be made more easily. Does that mean less things getting brought up to the Planning and Zoning Committee and perhaps City Council and sort of what does that look like? I know that, you know, for instance, in my neighborhood, there's concerned parties are sort of they sort of see these administrative decisions being made as sort of kind of a shadowy backroom deal kind of a thing at times, and I'm just wondering what does that look like, allowing more administrative decisions to be made versus something that a committee would see?
Commissioner Bruno, I think what we've really tried to do with this plan is talk about how we can be more flexible from a land use and process perspective. It's important to remember that any kind of changes to the development review process, any changes to really the development process need to happen as part of the land development code, not this plan. So we have contemplated, for example, you know, how can we make it so more zoning is consistent, more uses are allowed within a land use framework through Envision Longmont, and potentially having more zoning categories, for example, that might meet the intent of the mixed-use neighborhood, which right now it's pretty much land use and zoning are really closely aligned. You know, I think we have talked about as staff, is there a way that we can potentially look at certain processes and maybe they become administrative instead of a conditional use, but I don't think any of that is being decided with this plan. Certainly we've talked about from a housing perspective, is there a way that we could use the development process as a way to incent affordable housing? Again, those are conversations we've had as part of the Envision Longmont effort, but none of those changes are really going to be implemented as part of the plan adoption. So in the implementation strategies, you may see things that talk about how do we do that. That's really a change that would need to happen through the development code updates, and those are things that will be brought separately. You know, that process has kicked off, I think, this month, frankly, and will be going on through the rest of this year. The commission will be seeing things, I'm imagining, in chunks. And so those are questions, I can relay to Brian. I know we've talked before, and there's some concerns about that, but those are things that will really be brought up as part of that process.
Okay, thanks.
Aaron, I have a question for you. It is strategy 1.9 on page 163. Evaluate the feasibility of adding an architectural/design review committee to address the issues of scale and compatibility with neighborhoods and adopted design guidelines. Perhaps this actually, follows on to Commissioner Bruneau's question about neighborhoods feeling like, hey, things are getting administratively approved. What do you see this potentially creating, or how would this particular strategy possibly play out?
Commissioner Shernick, I don't know exactly how this could play out. This is something as staff that we've talked about. Certainly I think, one thing we've heard through the process is that there's a need to make sure that we're paying attention to context and we're paying attention to compatibility. And so I think one of the things we've talked about as staff is oftentimes it's difficult to evaluate those things, and we might consider using some type of design review board that may have design or architectural or some type of maybe more expertise around that could help us with those things and maybe be a little bit more strategic in how we look at those things, because I think the issues of compatibility and context are only going to get maybe more difficult as we are looking at more infill and more redevelopment. So this is something that I know Planner Burchett has talked about a lot and is interested in. So it's really, I don't have it in my mind conceived of what this would look like, but it's just something that we're interested in exploring.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Flagg.
I have a couple of things that I'm looking on page 168. And I think you said that ongoing actions will start, or they're already ongoing, and they'll just continue, so they're not a new thing. And in that reference, I was looking at strategy 2.14 and 2.16, because one of them says to work at getting fast tracks up here, and I'd like to think that it's not long way off, that we're working on it continuously. And then on strategy 2.16, it says continually invest. Am I reading that correctly in saying that we're still doing that, we've been doing that, and we're going to continue to do that? So it doesn't have a shorter term time frame like we're waiting for 5 years to begin.
Commissioner Flagg, that is correct. We are doing both of those strategies we are doing today. And certainly with the investing in infrastructure improvements, that's something that we always need to do. You can imagine if you improve a sidewalk now, it may need improvement again 10 years down the road. So it's cyclical. Those are things we just know that there's certain things that we're always going to need to do. These are things we may not ever be able to cross off the list. I mean, maybe the finishing fast tracks strategy we'll be able to cross off the list at some point, but continuing investing in infrastructure is something our community will need to do, for the entire future.
Would it make more sense to add the words continue to, I think we're trying to use different wording just to mix it up, but I think continue to work with regional transit providers, continue to invest in infrastructure improvements. If that's cleaner wording, I think we could certainly make that change.
There you go.
In that particular strategy, I would say it's a good idea to have it be something that you're telling the public we're not dropping it. Just as a political thing, I just wonder about that. Also, on the next page, 169, strategy 2.20, and you're talking about the overall safety of the transportation system and those using it, resulting in fewer injury accidents. And I think you mean per capita? I know that's a typo, but it sort of caught my eye. And I know it's here somewhere, but when you talked about on the transportation plan, BRT moving up Main Street, I guess I'm unclear what that would mean. And then, as long as we're on here, page 170, strategy 3.3. you're looking at the responsibilities, and it occurred to me, and perhaps you've already thought of this, that if you're talking about potentially property tax for inclusion in any kind of motivation, then you have to involve the county, because I think property tax is through them. And then strategy 3.5 and 3.6 on 171, I liked those a lot. I just wanted to say that was very nice. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up was thank you for making a separate section for pedestrians.
I have a quick question for you. Going back to strategy 2.21 on page 169, support the reduction or maintenance of current vehicle congestion on streets, and TDM programs. What are those?
Commissioner Shernick, we will certainly spell that out when this plan hits the streets again. Transportation demand management programs are different things like eco-pass programs, incentivizing folks to get out of their single occupant vehicle, use transit, use bicycling. It can also include bicycle, some of those structures that you've seen for bicycle storage at bus stations. So there's a bunch of different things that TDM kind of covers, but we'll make sure to outline that a little better.
Okay, great. Any more questions? Commissioner Goldberg.
Hi, Phil. Hi, Aaron. Thanks for your hard work on this. It's a lot of pages and a lot of work, and I appreciate everyone's feedback on it, too. Listen, just last week I heard on CPR Councilmember Joan Peck and former Councilmember Karen Banker being, I think, in an interview with maybe the chairman or a member of the board of RTD, talking about the delayed timing for fast tracks. And I think he might have said 2040. And is that what it was? Yeah, exactly. So, and I think in the past we've clarified that the timeline for this plan that we're working on kind of like sunsets between 10 and 20 years, right? We'll be reviewing this likely before some of the fast tracks and BRT plans have even been implemented. Maybe BRT is a little different. I don't know, because perhaps how the timeline on that is not, maybe I don't know as well as I should. But, you know, I can't help but notice in so many of the sections, so during the lifetime of this plan, which I recognize is kind of ongoing, you know, we looked at the 119 Gateway, St. Vrain Corridor, the Hover Street, you know, some of these key areas of focus, and each and every one of them rely on and mention kind of the role of BRT and, you know, Northern Corridor, commuter rail, and BRT and fast tracks. And so I just wonder, like, I don't think this is about editing it at all, but like, as you're developing this, knowing that the timeline for some of these projects may not even, you know, come to fruition during the life of this project, yet we're focusing on, you know, increasing high density residential in this area. And why is that a good idea? Because there's new transportation plans that are going to be kind of in development. And I just wonder, like, is that challenging for you when you're creating this to handle seeing where we need to go, but also recognizing that, man, some of these critical pieces like train and like rapid bus might not even be in the next 20 years. Sorry, maybe that's not necessary.
Just to answer the question, it's critical, regardless of the timing, it's critical that these items are on a plan so that if anything does move forward quickly, that we can go after grant funding or whatever it takes, and that they're on a recognized, adopted plan. So that's kind of the critical issues of making sure that these are there, and that's why, even though some of these items seem maybe a little far-fetched, or not far-fetched, but into the future at least, that we keep them on a plan, because who knows what happens in 10 years. And I think we're really counting on the bus rapid transit to be here in a 10-year time frame, at least on State Highway 119, and possibly then even on State or US 287 south. And who knows up north, we don't have the planning piece, but we just want to make sure that these are on a plan so we can be nimble when money does come forward.
More questions, discussion, comments? Commissioner Pohl?
So with this plan, or with the plan in the future, as things come before the board, you have currently the review criteria. Are you going to insert some of these areas into the review criteria when you present something to us?
Commissioner Pullen, so one of the things that we'll be doing after this plan is adopted is really using this to help inform the code updates. And so the other piece that I should have mentioned that will be added to this plan is really talking about amending this plan. And so the two kind of go hand in hand, you know, making plan amendments and then also making sure that applications are consistent with this plan. So there will need to be updates to the development code. I don't know specifically what those changes to the review criteria, if at all, if in name only, whatever those will be. That will be, again, through that separate code process. But certainly one thing that we're contemplating, we want this plan to remain flexible. We want, it's basically a living document, but we also don't want this plan, we don't want to be bringing in an application to amend this plan to you in August. We've spent a lot of time as a community really talking about what our vision for the future is, and so we want to be able to evaluate things kind of in concert with other amendments, in concert with other things that are going on in the city, and so we're proposing that we have, right now as it stands in the language is a semi-annual look and an amendment cycle for this plan, and so we need to think about how that manifests in the code updates, and so absolutely it will be informing those, and we'll be making amendments to that piece of the code as it relates to the review criteria and the amendment process and timing and everything else associated with that.
More questions? Pause to reflect. Commissioner Flade?
I was looking through this in the earlier part of the plan. I know we've gone over the policy framework, but this is just in terms of, I noticed that like there's an apple there, and then there's a tree in another place, and also where you're talking about the measuring, the indicators measuring our progress. I noticed in the baseline numbers there's a lot of TBDs. You haven't determined it yet. So I'm wondering if by the time it gets to May 25th, will you have numbers there, or is this something you're leaving blank, or I guess I don't know what your time frame is for filling that part in and what those wonderful little symbols mean.
Commissioner Flagg, so the symbols and those call-outs that you see kind of throughout the policy framework are really meant to highlight where there's cross-cutting strategies. So you'll see, for example, the cross-cutting topic of parks, recreation, open space, and trails that appears for the first time on page 31 with the cute tree and park bench. You'll see that repeated again in 5 and 3. And so that graphic is really what's tying those together. There'll be a different color in Guiding Principle 3. The apple relates to food access and kind of farmland. Really, this is, again, a different way of thinking about comprehensive planning. Right now, our plan is organized around topics. So if you're talking about parks, recreation, trails, and open space, you're in that chapter. Right now, we're talking about those topics as they relate to livable neighborhoods. And so what we've tried to do to help people kind of navigate through is, we're talking about how parks help make livable neighborhoods. In Section 3, we're really talking about access to the system. In Section 5, we're really talking about the ecological functions. And so we've tried to spell those out in those call-outs. And I think the graphics are just really a way to kind of connect the dots, just so you visually can see that. May or may not work for you.
I think it's a nice way of doing that because then it makes the reader stop and think about how it connects through, which is, I imagine, what the idea is.
That's absolutely correct. We really wanted to let people know that was the intention and the strategy is to have these cross-cutting items. And then the to be determined in terms of the indicators, a lot of this data, while we've tried to identify indicators that we have data for and that it's readily available and, at the click of a button we can get it, that's not the case in many instances. And so in some of these cases, it's going to be us creating data, it's going to be us mapping things, collecting things, and we still need time to figure this out. So the indicators will likely be presented in an online dashboard as well as potentially an annual report that may go hand in hand with maybe a report on how we're doing with the implementation section. And so that data will be updated in that section. I don't anticipate that we'll have all those to be determined filled in before the May 25th date, just simply because we don't have a lot of that data yet.
Aaron, I have a question for you. Like you mentioned, some questions about the future land use map on page 96 to 97. One thing that's struck me over the past several years, and we've sometimes had some discussions about this, is we've gotten applications for land use changes at the comprehensive plan level, and sometimes it feels as though we've approved a lot of them, and that well, gee, we're just changing things as the landowner wishes because we got the application, because they asked. So with this new plan, what have we done in terms of creating the plan to kind of, what's the right word, not to stanch the flow of those requests, but to take into account or to maybe possibly reduce us just kind of flipping things back and forth from one land use to another? And also, how would this plan stop us from doing a lot of that in the future as well?
Commissioner Shernick, we've talked a lot about this as staff, and I certainly can't say exactly what will happen in the future, but we've tried to do several things to kind of avoid the scenario you've just described. One of the things is what I mentioned earlier with the plan amendment process, and I realize you haven't seen that yet. Right now, folks can apply for plan amendments whenever they want to. Really what we're proposing is to do that on a more regular cycle. Again, right now we're thinking it makes sense to look at that semi-annually, maybe more frequent, maybe less frequent, depending on what decision makers think and what ultimately gets approved in the plan. But I think what that allows us to do is look at things in tandem. So, one of the things that we noticed was happening was we would evaluate an application and that would get approved. And then 2 months later, we'd evaluate another one. And we weren't really able to look at those as kind of a package. And so it seemed like, oh my gosh, we've just approved 5 applications. And we didn't necessarily, obviously we evaluate each one and we can look at things, but it makes sense probably to evaluate kind of their impact on the total system rather than individually. And so we're hoping that by grouping amendments together, we can do that. We're also hoping that since we've done so much community outreach and we've had so many conversations with property owners, we're hopeful that we don't have a lot of amendments right away anyway. Knowing that obviously there's still things that are going to happen. We've tried to build flexibility into the land use plan and really talk about how the land uses can be flexible. So, for example, the mixed use corridor is a great example. Right now on our current plan, a lot of that is strip commercial or multi-neighborhood commercial. It really doesn't allow for a lot of different types of uses. We're really envisioning this mixed use corridor, obviously to still allow for commercial and retail uses, but to be able to accommodate higher density residential, support type services, other employment uses. And so, we still have to deal with what kind of zoning a property has and what the uses that are allowed by the zoning district are. But hopefully we can accommodate those with zoning rather than having to do a bunch of land use amendments, as long as it's meeting the intent of what the future land use vision is. So those are some of the things that we've talked about. The other thing that we're really hoping is that we can use these areas of change and stability to really help inform our land use decisions. So our thinking is really that those areas that are in the areas of stability from a process perspective may be more difficult to have a land use change. Maybe there's a higher bar in the code because we've said as a community that these are the areas that we think are going to remain stable, so it may not make as much sense to be changing their land use because that would signify maybe a larger deviation from what's there today. And so I think there's a number of layers of ways we can use that and look at either process or timing or what have you in the code. And so I don't mean to kick everything to the code. Luckily, Brian and Don aren't here, so we're just assigning them a bunch of work. But no, really that's how we're going to implement this. So we need to think about how are we going to use the things that we've set up in here to avoid what you described.
Thank you, Aaron. That's a really great answer and allays a lot of my fears, especially the part about trying to look at things more holistically, because we've heard that from a lot of neighborhoods, that well, what about the development that just got approved, and are you taking that into account? So it sounds like we're headed in the right direction. Commissioner Bruno.
Oops. Yeah, so after reviewing this today, I was just thinking of, like what a really well-made document this is turning into, and it just seems like it's really very concise and sort of putting a lot of information in, but in a way that a layman could understand. And so I'm kind of curious, once this thing is live, aside from obviously links on web pages and things, what kind of like public outreach is there going to be for people to actually get a hold of this thing? Because, one of the reasons I'm asking is because, just in my brief time here, it seems like there's a lot of rezoning that people are unaware of, and like they show up and they'll talk about some development that's going right next to them that, when I bought the place, it was zoned low density, and now this is that. And I'm just wondering if this can be something that could sort of give people a little bit more of a heads up on what's happening. And, I'm just wondering what sort of, would people get this in the mail or not? Probably not, right?
Commissioner Bruno, we probably won't send them the entire plan in the mail just because that would likely be cost prohibitive. But, that's a great point. We've talked a little bit. I think it's our desire that more people throughout the community are informed about what's going on both now and into the future. We love when people call us and say, I'm looking at buying a house. What does your land use plan say? We love to get those calls. So I think we plan on continuing to do outreach. I think the plan summary that we have is one way that hopefully when people come into our office, we can let them know about what this plan says. We've done some articles in the City Talk and City Line, so hopefully maybe we can continue to use that and partner with the Public Information Office to get the word out. Phil and I have been a little bit of a traveling road show over the past year, and so people might be a little bit sick of seeing us in the community, but certainly we're always willing and excited to talk to Rotaries and the Realtors Association and other groups, and I imagine those types of things will continue even after plan adoption. And certainly if you all have ideas, Joni and I have talked about, would there be a way we could do a planning academy? We've worked with some of the schools in the past. There might be opportunity to partner with some of the schools to do something with this plan. So I think there's a number of things, and certainly if you have other ideas, we could look at mailing a flyer or something to let people know. If you have other ideas, certainly feel free to let Phil and I know, because obviously we don't want this to just drop off. It's not like, okay, the plan's done, now let's not ever talk about Envision Longmont again.
Well, the only thing that I would say, and this is a detail that maybe we don't need to discuss here, but, it seems like in my neighborhood at some point the zoning was changed. I've heard, like other places where zoning was changed, and really nobody knew that it happened as far as the people that actually live there. So I was just thinking if your zone is actually changing, you would get something saying it's changing, or if you're, say, within a short distance from the border of a change, that you would know about it. I feel like when people hear about these things and they're like, what? Well, I thought we were that zone, that it's they get pretty bummed that they had no idea that it was happening, basically.
Jenny, do you want to make some comments about the notification ranges? I think that might help us all.
Sure. So any application for rezoning, so what we're looking at today is land use, not zoning. So when we do rezone properties, those require a public hearing before Planning Commission and public hearing before Council. Those are not administrative decisions ever, and have not been in my tenure here, and I certainly would never recommend that. I think that would be contrary to the planning public process. We do notifications. You might recall with the last code update that Don brought forward, we looked at the appeal process, and we had a few iterations at Council with that. We ended up moving almost every notification to 1,000 feet. Most of them were 750 or 1,000 before, so we certainly do that. We have an active development map and a log on our website. So certainly, if you're adjacent to a rezoning, it would be, and we post the sites as well, so it would be difficult, I would think, especially if you were very close, not to know that that was going on, but certainly that happens. And certainly land use and as you can see from our full house tonight, doesn't always attract a lot of folks to come and stay queued in. So, but we certainly, as we look at the land use code updates, we have this week engaged a consultant, so we're starting that process. Brian and Don will probably have something to bring before you just as an outline at some point in the next couple months. And certainly we'll be looking at those again. We did do all of 1502, so we probably won't necessarily look at all of that again because that's where we really restructured some process. We will take into account, though, as Aaron points out, the idea of when we do comprehensive plan amendments and how we do them. I can't imagine that notice ranges would change. I think that we're all satisfied with them being higher and that threshold hopefully being met. You know, I think that always trying to reach out to folks and get folks in the door is a challenge. For people may look online at one thing, they maybe don't call, maybe don't ask a lot of questions. So I think to Aaron's point of how do we, you know, engage more folks to participate like you all do. I think planning academies and some other venues are good places. We go to the Neighborhood Group Leaders Association on a fairly regular basis to explain process. And their role really in the community is to go back to their neighborhood group and provide all that detail and information. It's a pretty good sounding board and a way to get information disseminated. So certainly we'll be happy to take input on process, but that's currently how rezoning works.
And Jenny, just as a follow-up, part of that discussion, I remember there was a segment where we were talking about renters being noticed. And where did we end up falling on that?
We did change that, so we are notifying renters as well in those processes. So we changed that section as well, per council's direction.
Commissioner
I just have one quick, excuse my ignorance on it, but when you say that there's a notification area, like what does that actually mean? Do they get a piece of mail, or is it they basically get a piece of mail in their mailbox?
Correct. So for a rezoning, for instance, you would get approximately 4 notifications by mail from the city, which one would be at your neighborhood meeting, which is required prior to submitting an application. That's the community's opportunity to give input to the applicant on their project. Once they do that piece, then they can submit their application. When they submit, we send another notification saying we have this application and it's being reviewed, and we give folks a comment date to get back to staff. Any comments we get in the staff DRC process, we bring forward to you at the public hearing here, which we also notice. And then again at planning, at city council, we notice. So you get a total of 4 notifications for any given project, in addition to the posting of the site with either a green sign at development application or a yellow sign once it goes to public hearing.
So another question. So if we go back to Aaron's comment about how we might put land use changes, package them like, say, semi-annually, then we might actually see many people being noticed at regular intervals rather than it being just kind of random as to when people are getting it. So people could get to the point with this concept that they would expect, okay, if there's going to be any sort of land use change, I would probably get my notice like January or June or something regular at least.
Commissioner Chernak, I think that might be an unintended good consequence of going to that schedule. And again, you also have to remember with not all rezonings, but with many, you see the land use amendment in tandem with a rezoning. So those are packaged together. So it may actually shift the number of rezoning requests we get as well if that requires a land use amendment. So I think there'll be some additional consequences of how we stagger that process.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Goldberg.
Just to keep talking about this topic, I have to commend the commissioner's interest in spreading the information and maybe doing a more effective job of making sure everyone knows about zone and code amendments in their areas. But gosh, I feel like the real issue lies in just with us living our lives day to day and the residents living day to day and not really, an issue of rezoning isn't really a big deal until it's in your own backyard, and then it's like, oh, I didn't know. But I think there's probably an abundance of opportunities for folks to find out what's happening in their area, what is the zoning, and then it seems like as we hear case after case that that there's four notifications. But of course, when it's the day of and we're making the vote, and the folks are in the audience, they're gonna, there's gonna be a perception that I didn't know, and maybe the minority that will be the case. But I think for the most of us, we're just living our lives and trying to be happy in Longmont, and we just aren't aware until it's in our backyard. You mentioned, Aaron, that the Realtors Association is a group that you reach out to, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I can't think of a time when we're more in tune with what's happening around us than when we're buying that property. Like, that's when we're checking the mail. That's when we're asking those questions, and it seems like getting an educated realtor association and an active realtor association to spread the word and to communicate that to their clients would be really important. And then I was just, in a perfect world, wouldn't it be neat if when you received your first utility bill, you got a welcome to Zone 5, and do you know this is your zoning? And I think that's probably about as realistic as mailing the entire plan to everyone in the residence, but it'd be a one-pager. It'd be interesting to find that place when you go to get your, sign up for your utilities, or what is it that we all do when we move into a property that we all could receive that one page that says, here you are, welcome to the zone, and this is what's happening.
Knowing my luck, I'll be welcome to District 13.
Yes.
Commissioner Height.
I can turn myself off. First of all, a little old giant big hand to Aaron and Phil. You've done fantastic work. I'm very appreciative of that. I focused on the implementation strategies because it appears to me that that's where the rubber's going to hit the road, and that's where the first things that are going to happen. And I had a few comments. Kind of by strategy, and the first one that struck me was strategy 3.4, which is on page 170. You want to identify a dedicated funding source for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I don't know what that is, and I don't know if others will know what that is, and maybe I'm just being pedantic, but I don't know if you want to address that with more clarity. Section 310, which is on the following page, you're identifying something called the St. Vrain Community Hub to connect residents with potential job opportunities. I don't know what the St. Vrain Community Hub is, but my question is, whatever it is it going to be around for the 10-year duration of this plan? And do you want to couch your language differently? Entities that help people find jobs, types of, is my thought there. Section 4.3, which is on page 174, kind of the same type of comment. You want to partner with Boulder County Healthy Eating and Active Living Coalition, a specific entity called HEAL, Live Well Longmont, and other organizations to help people's health. Again, very specific entities that in this goal-oriented long-range thing may or may not be here at the end of your planning period. 4.8, which is on page 175, update the public improvement design standards and construction specs to implement something called the integrated resilient design. I don't know, what is that? Is that Is that a thing?
Do you want me to address all these, or just that one? We've been working with a coalition in the county to look at resilient design standards. So yes, it is a thing. It is a specific thing. And we've been kind of leading a coalition of folks that were affected by the floods and did receive a community development block grant, disaster recovery grant, to look at that, and have been working on specific standards that are really related to making a community more resilient.
Is the plan then that that this integrated resilient design thing will be adopted as code, as a land use standard, as a building spec?
So the construction design standards and construction specifications really are kind of aside for infrastructure of what the development code is for private property. And so yes, there's a number of strategies that you'll see throughout here that are asking to update those standards. And so this is really looking at, I think this strategy is really looking at how do we make our infrastructure, so roadways, bridges, things of that nature, how do we make it more resilient in the face of, for example, a flood or other type of natural disaster? And so that's what these integrated resilient design standards are looking at. So yes, we would actually be, I don't think those standards would come to this group necessarily. They would be approved by council. That's something that we use in the development review process and that Public Works uses a lot in terms of designing infrastructure.
And then they're adopted into the building specifications and plans and requirements. Great. Next comment. Again, section 5.2, it's kind of addressed to the same thing on page 177. There's an updated sustainability plan. I didn't know we had one. That's codified.
It's not. That planning process just kicked off like on Monday. We've been working with a consultant, and Commissioner Poland is representing this group on the stakeholders committee. So that integrated sustainability plan is really going to be picking up where the 2010 effort left. We, as a community, had started working on a sustainability plan. It never actually got adopted by City Council, so we've started that effort again, kind of to be informed by Envision Longmont, so that will be something that's likely accepted by City Council. I don't know that it will come to this group. It's really more kind of being guided by the Board of Environmental Affairs, but it will be a document that's likely accepted by City Council.
Thank you. Next comment was section or strategy 5.5. Same page. Review and update existing, review and update the existing land development code relative to local food production and urban agriculture and update as needed. We don't have an ag zone that I'm aware of. How does this get implemented? I mean, it looks to me like we're trying to encourage food production or local farming, and how does that happen in our city?
Commissioner Height, we are absolutely trying to encourage local food production and urban agriculture within the city. I think that's, you'll see that in the policy framework as well as these implementation strategies. We do have an agricultural zone, but that's really focused primarily around Union Reservoir. Really what this is aimed at is looking at maybe smaller scale local food production. It could be looking at agritourism. It could be looking at more urban agriculture, backyard, front yard gardening, vertical gardening, different types of things as they relate to, maybe you producing food on your lot, maybe a small commercial operation that wants to produce food in conjunction with their restaurant. We've had a number of different things that have come up. We have recently made some changes to the development code to look at urban agriculture as an accessory use, and so I think this would really just kind of be an expansion of that and taking a look at some of the best practices and trends as it relates to food production and urban ag. That's something we've heard a lot about throughout this process.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Then finally, 6.9, another comment regarding a specific reference to finding a permanent location for Front Range Community College. That may not be our local community college 10 years down the line. I just don't know if you want to use that specific of an entity. And those are all my comments. Again, congratulations. Great work.
Any other comments or observations, thoughts, discussion? Aaron, Phil, again, great work. Where do we go at this point with this section of the meeting? How do you want to wrap this up?
Commissioner Shernick, members of the commission, I don't think we're looking for a specific recommendation or vote from you tonight. Again, we'll be doing that at your next meeting on May 25th. That will be a public hearing item with a recommendation to City Council, so we will likely run through a presentation kind of outlining some of the sections and things that we've talked about. Again, if you have specific kind of grammar questions or, hey, you should include this in the glossary, please let Phil and I know that sooner rather than later so we can get that in the adoption draft. We look forward to meeting with you next month. And again, Phil and I really appreciate all the time and study sessions and work sessions that you've spent with us. It's been extremely valuable. And I think the plan really reflects the collaborative efforts of this group as well as many others. So this truly is kind of your plan as well as the community. So we really thank you for all your work on this and look forward to our unanimous vote next month, right?
Just a little reminder there, right? Okay. Thank you very much again, Aaron and Phil.
May I ask one question?
Commissioner Goldberg.
Aaron, Commissioner Height just pointed out there were specific programs that you guys are working on, sustainability program projects and some other ones. I forget the names. Do you think those should land in the glossary at the end? Is that where they would go at it? I don't see them listed there. And so I wonder if maybe some of those design programs that he pointed out or sustainable projects may be referenced there.
All right. This is a public meeting. Item 7 on our agenda is a final call for the public invited to be heard. Jane? Nobody signed up? Nobody signed up? Nobody's in the audience. And nobody can call in from the TV audience either. So we'll close the public invited to be heard. Any items from the commission?
Yeah.
Commissioner Boland.
Well, as Aaron mentioned, I've been asked to be on the Sustainability Advisory Committee as our representative. We had our first meeting on Monday. It was kind of an introduction to the committee, kind of getting everybody's thoughts. There's about 20 to 30 different stakeholders, different groups from the city. Kind of getting our thoughts on what we consider as sustainability, what our big issues would be. They're going to try to prioritize items to look at. I may be bringing back questions to the P&Z here, if it's something that I feel that maybe would be a good discussion point for us. So,
great, thank you, Commissioner Poland. Thanks for your service on that. That'll be interesting to find out how that goes. Any other items from the commission? Seeing none. Items. Well, our council representative is not here. We'll skip that. Items from the Planning and Development Services Director, Jenny Marsh.
So a couple of things. I introduced Commissioner Rodriguez, and I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I don't know if we congratulated Commissioner Height on his appointment as a regular commission member to a 5-year term. So welcome, Commissioner Height, to the chair full-time as well. And then for next month, currently how we're tracking is that we would not have our meeting on the 3rd Wednesday. We would have our meeting on the 4th Wednesday, where we would be doing the comprehensive plan, Envision Longmont, as Aaron just mentioned. That would be the first item up. And we do have a couple of development items that we will put after that. Should anything else surface, as I'm sure you can imagine, we have a pretty full docket these days. So that's where Dawn and I think we're at tonight, that we'll just have one meeting, but we'll kind of track that for the next couple weeks. And if anything else were to fall into that, we may need to do the 3rd meeting just so we don't end up with a pretty onerous meeting that, at least I don't enjoy being here past 11. I don't know about you guys, but so anyway, we'll keep you posted, and if anything changes, Jane or I will send you an email. And then I think you all got my email about the training that APA is putting on in Golden. So if you have the opportunity, Commissioner Rodriguez is going to attend. It's a great kind of primer, great, go back and listen and remember your roles and your duties. And so if you get a chance to do that, great. And I'll keep my eyes open for other opportunities. CML does a good training occasionally. I know Josh and Michael went to that last year. That one hasn't come back around, but we'll keep you posted on when those do.
Okay.
That's all I have. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jenny. If there are no objections, we will adjourn. All right.